Hello everyone and thank you for the wait. We're hoping you are enjoying the story so far. Please remember to leave a like, comment and sub. Now let us begin. Brutal-Fairytales Stray Dogs Redemption Part 10. Just before the gun went off, Astaroth jumped in and knocked Alastair to the ground. As the sound of the gunshot echoed through the room, Alastair opened his eyes and saw Astaroth quickly dragging him behind cover. Astaroth pulled Alastair behind a reinforced moving crate. He knew that this crate would not last long against them. Astaroth and Alastair knew what these creatures are. They are known as Hobgrim across the world. Alastair quickly took a breath as he looked up to Astaroth, who was already shooting at the rats. Astaroth quickly dispatched as many of the rats as he could, while simultaneously examining the Hobgrim's weapons. They were handmade guns in typical Hobgrim raider fashion. Crude raw Junker-style guns like bolt actions, shotguns, crude repeater rifles. They were not exactly factory-made, but they were deadly, nonetheless. The weapons were well made for what they were. Just one well-placed bullet and this would be all over for them. Astaroth and Alastair knew that this just had to be a small scouting party. Even knowing this, just one slip-up and they would be dead. Solely depending upon the tribe or clan, some Hobgrim raiders are as cruel as they are savage and bloodthirsty. If the Hobgrim wanted something, then only death would stop them. Again, that solely depends upon the clan or tribe that they came from. Judging on how fast these ones resorted to violence, they were not exactly from a welcoming clan or tribe. Astaroth and Alastair would have to play this out and play it as smartly as they could. They were completely outmanned and outgunned in the firefight. Still, Astaroth was already planning the best way to handle this. As Alastair started to prepare himself for the fight, hot bullets were zipping past them as Astaroth tried to return fire and see just what the Hobgrim's weapons were. He tried to take in as much information as he could about the area they're fighting in right now. Alastair noticed hot blood bleeding through the sleeve of Astaroth's jacket. Astaroth did not seem to notice, or maybe he was just too used to the pain. Alastair was in shock at what he had found. These things were not supposed to be here. They were just supposed to come here and kill some giant rats, that was all. This was not exactly part of the job description. However, that did not change the fact right now. They were being shot at from these Hobgrim. They're feral Hobgrim, Alastair stated in shock. No fucking shit, Sherlock, now fight like hell or die, Astaroth shouted as he ducked down just as a bullet flew above his head. Astaroth grabbed Alastair's rifle off the ground and shoved it into his chest with one hand. As a rat came round beside them, Astaroth shot it. Get back in the fight, soldier, Astaroth ordered him. Right. Alastair said as he quickly got his head back into the fight. Alastair aimed at the Hobgrim and fired bullet after bullet. After all the rounds he sent at the Hobgrim, he only barely wounded one of the bloodthirsty Hobgrim. Astaroth grabbed Alastair's shoulder and forced him down. Focus, jackass, don't go throwing bullets around like candy, and aim, goddammit. You focus on the rats first. Bullets are a faster and better way to die than the goddamn plague, Astaroth ordered as he quickly looked up. Right, Alastair said as he quickly reloaded his rifle, then focused his fire onto the rats. Alastair fired at the rats, dropping two of them before ducking back down just as the Hobgrim fired at him. Astaroth sprung up and shot a Hobgrim, planting the bullet straight in its throat. Like a machine, he instantly chambered another round and shot a rat in the head. He was almost mechanical in nature and behaved like he was completely disconnected from the chaos surrounding them. His rifle was a bolt action, but for as fast as he was at working the bolt, one could easily mistake it for a repeater rifle. with open palm pulling the bolt back then slamming it back into place. This was a technique that Alastair had heard of. However, he really did not think it was possible to pull off this quickly. Until he saw Astaroth doing it right now. Astaroth moved quickly across the room to a heavy wooden table and quickly flipped it over. As Alastair watched Astaroth move across the room, he noticed that something was different about Astaroth's eyes. They were completely bloodshot and incredibly focused. Above all, there was no emotion on his face at all. No hatred, nor fear, nor panic, he was void of all life. There was just nothing there. Astaroth was utterly blank like a machine. Nothing but that death stare locked on his targets as bullets flew around him. He simply returned fire, putting round after round through the air. Astaroth's bullets found their home into the Hobgrim's head, throats, and center of their chests. There was nothing inside him, only emptiness, coldness, and mercilessness. It was like watching a killing machine, not a human. Astaroth made every shot count into both the Hobgrim and the rats as he moved across the room. Alastair could not help but feel that it seemed like Astaroth had done this before, and he was good at it. Now the rats, Astaroth ordered as he knocked the empty magazine from his rifle with a fully loaded one. Then he slammed the loaded magazine into his rifle. As he kept the Hobgrim pinned down. The Hobgrim were not about to make it easy for them. Several of them tried blind firing over their cover at them. However, Astaroth kept them pinned down the best he could. If one poked their head out at just the wrong time, then they would get a bullet to the skull. Alastair immediately sprung up and gunned down the last of the rats. Once Alastair shot the last rat, he had to reload his rifle. Astaroth noticed that the Hobgrim were dangerously close to one of the distillers. He had little options and little time to think about it. So, he shot at the alcohol distiller, bursting its side open and covering the Hobgrim in pure alcohol. Being covered in the alcohol made their guns inaccessible unless they wanted to burst into flames once the muzzle flash met the alcohol. As the Hobgrim discarded their guns, they immediately drew their melee weapons and charged at Astaroth and Alastair. Astaroth quickly let out a loud whistle calling for his brother. Rook quickly came running into the room. He locked onto one of the Hobgrim and tackled him onto the ground and tore into it. Rook sunk his teeth deep into the Hobgrim's neck and crushed its throat with his strong jaws. As a Hobgrim went to stab Rook with his knife, Astaroth ran up to his brother and jumped over him. Astaroth slammed his hammer into the side of the Hobgrim's knee. A cracking sound echoed from the Hobgrim's leg. It was the sound of broken bones, and they knew it. The Hobgrim fell onto his hands and knees. Astaroth looked down at him for a second as he stepped behind the Hobgrim. Then Astaroth put the shaft of the hammer on the Hobgrim's throat, forcing him up onto his knees. Astaroth slammed his right knee into the back of the Hobgrim's head while forcing the hammer back. That forced the Hobgrim's throat against the bar, making a sick, bone-crunching sound. A sickening snapping sound rang through the air and echoed for a short time. Astaroth unfeelingly and forcefully shoved the Hobgrim's body to the side, discarding its body like it was nothing more than trash to him now. Alastair could not believe what he was seeing. There was no expression on Astaroth's face as he crushed that Hobgrim's throat. As he took down one enemy, he simply moved on to the next one. As the body hit the ground, Astaroth turned around, only to see another Hobgrim driving his long knife into his chest. Astaroth watched unmoved as the blade dug deep into his flesh. It was like he had no sensation of pain. He quickly put the hammer behind the Hobgrim's head and grabbed hold of it. Then he quickly pulled the hammer towards himself, forcing the Hobgrim's head towards him. Astaroth quickly slammed his forehead against the Hobgrim's nose, shattering it. The Hobgrim lost his grip on the knife. as he grabbed his nose trying to stop the blood now pouring from his nostrils and the tears pouring from his eyes. The Hobgrim tried to catch his balance, but Rook bit down on the Hobgrim's leg. Rook lifted up on the Hobgrim's leg, forcing the Hobgrim onto the ground. As the Hobgrim hit the ground, Astaroth stomped his boot onto the Hobgrim's chest. He looked at the knife still embedded in his chest, then looked down at the Hobgrim. He pointed his hammer down at the Hobgrim. Astaroth put the head of his hammer against the Hobgrim's head before rocketing his hand up. With all his strength and all his cold fury, Astaroth slammed his hammer into the Hobgrim's head. He hit the Hobgrim over and over again with unchecked savagery, cruelty, and brutality. Hot blood, bone, and grey matter erupted from the Hobgrim's head, smearing across the floor. Every time he slammed the hammer down, the Hobgrim's head became more unrecognizable from what it once was. Hot blood splashed farther from the body as Astaroth slowly caved in the Hobgrim's head. Blood slung up into the air every time he raised his hammer. Hot blood hit and covered Astaroth's face, and slowly dripped down onto his jacket. He kept going until he had to grip the hammer with both hands, but kept swinging, nevertheless. He kept swinging until he was doing little more than crushing broken bones into the blood-drenched floorboards. All the while his face never changed from that cold, expressionless death stare. Alastair and the last Hobgrim just watched this savage act of violence in shock and horror. As Astaroth released all of his unbridled bloodlust onto the poor corpse. In spite of all of this, Astaroth seemed to be in total control of himself. He just wanted this Hobgrim to suffer this horrid mutilation and defilement for stabbing him. It was like this was the Hobgrim's punishment for wounding him. "He's gone rabid," the Hobgrim said in his language, stepping back. Even this bloodthirsty raider had not seen this barbarous and willful act of violent murder like this before now. For even the savages had their own codes of conduct. This, however, was no different than a rabid beast or feral animal. It was downright beastly and inhumane, to say the least. Only a monster could perform such a horrific act and still not be fazed by it. He was little more than a primal beast. The thing that was truly haunting about this was that Astaroth's expressionless face never once changed. That cold, dead death stare in his eyes was void of all life and feeling. He had that 1,000-yard stare, unblinking, unflinching, and unmoved by all the horrors around him. Nor moved by the horrors that he has committed. "Ash!" Alastair shouted, drawing Astaroth's attention. Astaroth did not say a single word. He slowly turned his blood-stained head and looked back at Alastair. It was then and there Alastair could see it. Astaroth was still in control of himself the whole time. He had not gone berserk per se, he was in complete control of his actions and decisions. The look in Astaroth's eyes haunted Alastair. Those eyes that were completely empty like a doll's eyes. They were now full of joy, bliss, and pure ecstasy. It was those damned eyes that haunted Alastair. Astaroth was happy and Alastair could clearly see it. There was a childish smile now on that stone face of his, and eyes that now sparkled with life. Alastair could not put it into words, those eyes. There was just something completely off about them. Those once cold and empty royal emerald green eyes were now full of life. Astaroth was completely and utterly happy with himself right now. As if he had hit the peak of his stride and was in pure bliss of his own actions. Those damned eyes wanted more death, more destruction, more vile bloodshed. It is as if he had tasted the sweetest honey or nectar and now yearns for more. It was like they were not even the eyes of a human but something else entirely different. As if Astaroth's ancestors he was descended from took a completely different evolutionary path. One drenched in bloodshed, in vile cruelty. Some prehistoric throwback to ancient man perhaps. From a time in history when men needed to be more savage than civilized. For whatever reason he could only compare them to the eyes of a wolf on the hunt. He was calm, he was calculating, he was studying. He was deciding just how much energy he needed to expend to catch his prey. Or in this case he was calculating what was the most savage and cruel way to dispatch his opponent. As if to send a message that said, "All who defy me I'll do even worse to you." Astaroth's body slowly trembled violently as he tried to calm himself down. He forced air through his teeth and deep into his lungs. As the joy slowly faded from him, he snapped his head towards the last Hobgrim, who was trembling in fear for his life from Alastair, Rook, and this barbaric, rabid, deranged child. Astaroth, still trembling, stepped forward, breathing through his blood-stained teeth. He pulled the knife from his chest and threw it onto the ground as he continued to walk forward, all the while pointing the hammer at the Hobgrim, as if to say, "What can I do to you now?" To the Hobgrim. He stepped towards the Hobgrim, his eyes locked onto the poor soul in front of him. Astaroth wanted to do something much more horrific to this one, but what to do? The last of the Hobgrim quickly ran across the room. The Hobgrim grabbed a young girl out from behind a crate. Her pink dress was ripped and torn, bare feet were covered in deep cuts and bruises. Her hands tied behind her back by thick ropes that cut into her flesh. Astaroth stopped as he saw the girl. He knew what had happened to her. He knew that look in her eyes, and he knew what they did to her down here. The Hobgrim held her in front of himself, using her as a human shield. Do it, shoot me," the girl pleaded through her tears as she pulled her head closer to the barrel of his gun. The Hobgrim held a gun to her head and pulled the barrel away from her head. Astaroth froze as he noticed that it was the same girl that ran into him from yesterday. It all finally clicked in for Astaroth now, how stupid he had been. The lady upstairs is the girl's mother, and the two look so similar. Astaroth took a deep breath as he slowly stepped back. Alastair came out from behind his cover and aimed at the Hobgrim. He tried to get a shot off, but he could not get a clear shot lined up, not without hitting the girl. Alastair would not fire at the Hobgrim until he knew that the bullet would hit the Hobgrim. He had to wait until he could get a clean shot lined up. Astaroth and Rook circled around behind the Hobgrim. Astaroth twirled his hammer around in his hand, his eyes still locked on the Hobgrim. The Hobgrim kept turning the girl towards Alastair and Astaroth, not letting them get too close to him. "Drop your weapons or the girl dies," the Hobgrim stated in his language. "Bad move pal, you shoot her and you're next," Alastair said in the Hobgrim language. "Let her go and you die quickly and painlessly," Astaroth stated in the Hobgrim language as he threw his hammer into his left hand. "I am walking out of here with the girl," the Hobgrim ordered. "Not going to happen," Alastair explained. As the Hobgrim focused his attention on Alastair and Astaroth, he did not notice Rook sneaking around behind him. Astaroth watched and waited for the right moment, his right hand clenched at his side. As Rook leaped up and bit the Hobgrim's shoulder, crushing his shoulder inwards with his powerful jaws. The Hobgrim quickly wrenched in pain, making him release the girl. She ran straight towards Alastair as he quickly shouldered his rifle as she ran into his arms. As the Hobgrim fought to point his gun at them, Alastair grabbed the girl and spun around. He shut his eyes, knowing what was about to happen. The sound of a gunshot hung in the room for a moment. Alastair slowly opened his eyes. He was fine. He looked back and saw Rook forcing the Hobgrim's body onto the ground. Alastair noticed a small bit of blood pouring out of two small holes in the sides of the Hobgrim's head. As Rook let go of the body and stepped away, Alastair looked at Astaroth. There he saw him standing there with his lever-action pistol in hand. Alastair watched as Astaroth flipped it down, ejecting the spent cartridge out the side. Then flipped it back up in a rapid action, as the empty cartridge hit the ground with a metallic clanking sound. Astaroth walked towards Alastair and the girl. He holstered his pistol and slid his hammer back into his sling. He took off his jacket before he handed his jacket towards them. He turned his head as he reached out his hand, giving them his jacket. Alastair quickly covered the girl with the jacket. Alastair looked at Astaroth and noticed. He was back to the same cold, dead, expressionless statue that he had been. He nodded his head to Astaroth before he quickly walked the girl out of the room straight up to the upper floor. Rook walked towards Astaroth carrying his hat in his teeth. Astaroth flicked the dirt off his hat before putting it back on. He leant over and petted Rook's head. He was happy to see that his brother was not hurt. He lit a cigarette as he tried to calm his nerves and breathe the fire out of his lungs. He pulled a handkerchief out from his pocket, then cleaned off his face and hammer. He looked around the room, examining it closely. Astaroth and Rook spotted a man-made hole in the back wall. It was just wide enough for the rats and the Hope Grim to crawl through. The faint smell of sewage came through the hole. He fanned the stench away with his hat. He and Rook pushed a heavy crate in front of the hole, barricading it up with the heaviest things they could move. He looked around the room until he saw a first aid kit mounted on the wall. He looked down at the wound on his chest. He completely forgotten it was there until he saw the med kit. He knew what he had to do. At least this wound had stopped bleeding. That would make this a little easier. Okay, basic field dressing, Astaroth stated as he walked towards the med kit. Rook watched the barricade for any movement. As Astaroth took the med kit off the wall, he made some room on one of the crates, so he could use it as a table before he opened the med kit. He took off his waistcoat, his tie, his button-up shirt, and his tank top. He set them off to the side before he cleaned his wounds, one at a time with some alcohol swabs. He took a canister with a flappable metal tube and put the end of the tube in his wound. Astaroth took a few deep breaths before pushing the top down on the canister. As he did, a gel poured from the tube. The gel burned his wound, cauterizing and stopping the bleeding. Astaroth let out a few deep breaths through his teeth. As his wound cauterized, he tried not to focus on the pain. He pulled a metal rectangle out of the kit, then pinched the opening of his wound back together, then pushed the rectangle against his wound. As he did, a clicking sound echoed through the room for a moment. As he moved across his wound, leaving metal staples across the wound holding it together. Then he covered the wound with bandages. Astaroth did this to all of his wounds, just like his grandmother taught him not long ago. Then he burned the swabs and his handkerchief with his lighter in a metal bowl, then dumped the ashes. He was too used to having to do this. The good thing about having bad parents was that he was used to taking care of himself. As sad as he was, at least he could just feel something other than cold and numb. Astaroth quickly redressed himself and put the medkit back on the wall before he started looting the bodies. He took the black leather coat off one of the bodies and loaded it with all the loot. He would go through all the guns later, for right now he needed to get out of here before the authorities showed up. It was a lot easier that way than explaining to them what exactly happened down here. That was the last thing he wanted to do today. If nothing else, he was getting paid for all this trouble he had been through. Now, he could just sell off all this stuff and try to make a little extra money. As he finished loading all the loot, he tied up the jacket tightly with a rope. He was wondering if he should return it to the pawn shop and try to see what he could get for all this stuff there. However, there was no guarantee he would get a good price at a local pawn shop. They could try to chump change or flat out rip him off. He definitely did not want that to happen. After buying his new rifle, he needed all the money he could get right now. Alastair walked back into the room carrying Astaroth's jacket over his shoulder. He walked over to Astaroth and handed him back his jacket. She said she did not know about the Hope Grim down here. She placed the order this morning, however her daughter went down here to get some bottles to be used. When the girl did not come up, she came down to check on her. That's when she saw the dread rats. She is calling the Black Priesthood now, they'll be here soon for cleanup. Finally, her insurance will cover any and all damages done to the premise. So, we had better bounce right now. Alastair explained. Then we had better be gone before they get here, Astaroth stated as he put his jacket back on. Do you think they? Alastair said, trailing off. Yes they did. It's just another wound. She's going to need a special doctor to heal it, Astaroth stated quickly with a removed tone in his voice. Hey, so about earlier, are you okay? Alastair asked, looking at the corpse that Astaroth destroyed the head of. He was fearful that Astaroth would fly off the rails again. I'm fine, Astaroth snapped, looking at the body. I try not to lose control of myself. I'm sorry about that outburst, Astaroth explained. You want to talk about it? Alastair asked. Go fuck yourself, Astaroth stated. Here. It's your cut, Alastair said, handing Astaroth his cut of the money. Grab that, Astaroth said as he flicked his cigarette aside, then quickly counted it all out. Right, let's go, Alastair stated as he lifted the makeshift bag. Here, 50 now, take it before I come back to my senses, Astaroth said, handing him some money. Alastair looked at Astaroth in shock for a moment, then took the money and put it in his pocket. Astaroth lit another cigarette as they headed up the stairs. As they got back to the bar, the woman that hired them was wiping the tears off her face. Astaroth closed his eyes before taking a deep breath. He walked over to her, looking through his wallet, then tapped on the counter. What do you want? I already paid your friend, now leave, damn it, she demanded. Here, Astaroth said, handing her a business card. What is this? The woman asked, looking at the card. She's a good psychiatrist who specializes in trauma cases like this. She's good and she doesn't charge a lot. She can help, Astaroth said before he walked away. This was strange for Alastair to see Astaroth sympathizing with the woman. Rook looked back and barked at Alastair, snapping him back to reality. Alastair quickly adjusted the makeshift strap to the makeshift bag, so he could carry this makeshift bag easier under his arm before following after them. He looked at Astaroth's back and started thinking to himself. It was quite strange to him how fast Astaroth could fly off the rails and then stop himself. He was not exactly sure who Astaroth was, but he definitely came in handy in a fight. At least they were alive, a few bumps and bruises aside, but they were still alive all the same. However, he could not shake this feeling that he would like to know Astaroth a bit more. Outside, Astaroth, Rook, and Alastair walked down the street. As Astaroth pulled the last cigarette from his metal case, he snapped it shut. He rubbed his eyes before he lit the cigarette. Out? Alastair asked. No, Astaroth answered quickly. You know those ain't good for you, right? Alastair asked as they continued onwards. Neither is sex, drugs, or alcohol. That doesn't stop people from doing them now, does it? So how about you let me do me? Astaroth quickly answered. So, you're a great shot. Where did you learn how to shoot like that? Alastair asked, trying to ease the mood around him. My grandfather takes me hunting a lot, Astaroth answered. So do you need that leg brace? How did you hurt your leg? Alastair asked, still trying to lift the dark mood around them. Go fuck yourself. Astaroth answered. He liked the quiet and wanted it to stay quiet. Okay, why do you have a psychiatrist's business card in your wallet? Alastair asked. Go fuck yourself. Astaroth answered. It seemed to be his go-to answer for any and all of Alastair's questions that he did not want to answer. So, are we heading back to the pawn shop? Alastair asked, readjusting the loot under his arm. There's no guarantee they will ever take them, nor that they would give us a fair deal. But we really don't have any other options. Astaroth stated as he refilled his metal cigarette case with the cigarettes of the pack he bought earlier today. Oh, I know a good place and it's not far too. Follow me. Alastair stated as he led them across the street down the road. Thank you all for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please stay tuned as episode 11 will be coming out soon. Please remember to leave a like, comment and sub as it really helps the channel. We will see you in the next episode of Brutal Fairy Tales Stray Dogs Redemption.